for coming. Before we start the conversation, I wanted to just say a few words. The exhibition started with one piece of sculpture that we were asked to sell. And I thought that I know very little about early Giacomettis. And it brought me to that famous letter of Alberto Giacometti to Pierre Matisse that he wrote in 1947, which is such a moving testimony, first of all, of relationship of an artist to his dealer. I don't think that such a letter can be written in any day today. Really explaining to Pierre Matisse how and why he did what he did from 1925 till the time of the letter, and illustrating it. And we thought that it will do well if we retranslate it to English. Once translated, we retranslated it again. And we have asked Casimiro Di Crescenzo, the expert of Alberto Giacometti work, who works for so many years with the both foundations, with the foundation in Zurich and the one in Paris, and is going now to publish for the first time the collection of 1,400 letters that Alberto Giacometti wrote during his lifetime to his family, basically. And it will be the first time that we can read the letters he wrote about every passage of his life. Basically, once a week, probably, he wrote them a letter. So that is. And through that letter of Pierre Matisse, we started investigating whether we could get and assemble some of these works. And it is probably the biggest ever, definitely in England, exhibition of works, pre-war works of Alberto Giacometti. Among them, two plasters, the 1927 plaster, the autoportrait, and the Tête qui marche, which were never shown outside of France, ever, and were always in the same hand until today, in the same hand of the same family that had it shown in 1927, and were never obviously cast. It was still in the original plaster of 1927. So once we got all that, we thought that we are very lucky. And then, being so lucky, we thought that it would be great if we could ask you, Antony, to have some conversation about it. The man who struggles with the human figure all his life, and Alberto Giacometti, who struggled with the portraits all his life. And it would be interesting to hear what you have to say about it. We have also asked Calvin Wiener to come and speak with us because the Sainsbury Foundation is making a major exhibition of 50 years to the death of Giacometti in April. And they came here to look at the works. We are lending them some works, and it's a great privilege to have you as well.
Thank you.
Yuval Etgar, our in-house expert, who is finishing his doctorate at the Ruskin School at Oxford, is a brilliant help and was working with Casimiro in producing that wonderful catalog together with all our team. And I wanted to thank you, Yuval. And also Yuval will be the man who will narrate the evening. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for coming. This, as Daniela said, really was a big project, and I think maybe to say one word before we start, I think we were talking a little bit today preparing for this conversation, and I think one of the things we were asking ourselves, so at the end of the day, so what is this that this exhibition really brings to the table? Other than this easy thing to say, we've collected all of these things that are out there. And so we remember a line that was written by a German historian, Thomas Nipperdey, who once said that the role of historians and their readers is to bring back to the past what it once had, an open future. And I think there's something about this group of works and this time where we don't get the answer of what Giacometti became or what we know him for at the end, what was that resolution that he found in his sculptures. But actually the point where the questions are asked, the point where this negotiation of space, of working with figures, of working with other tendencies and movements in the time, are being really, really put into question. And I think in that sense, we really feel privileged that we've had that opportunity. And so this is why we felt the exhibition really starts from the works. So when we had a bit of a conversation beforehand, we said, last time we had the previous exhibition here of Alighiero Poeti, we had Mark Godfrey and Cornelia Parker coming over, and they had an idea that instead of just talking in a very formal questions and answers way, what we're going to do is just let each one of the panelists to start by choosing a work that is in the exhibition, maybe say a few words about the work and about their relationship to it. So we're going to try it, and we'll see if that develops, and if not, I promise I did prepare a set of questions to avoid the awkward silences. But maybe, I think really, Casimiro, you really are...
I have to start.
Yeah. The obligation is for you.
Okay, I would like to start with the Tête d'Ottilia, Ottilia head. Ottilia was the sister, because this, and also this sculpture was made in 25, like the Tours, that we have two examples in plaster in bronze, and are two different work of art. And this is the moment where Giacometti has to choose what he wants to do.
And that's the torso. If you want, I can pass it and you can see it. That's the torso.
Because Ottilia heads represent all the knowledge that Giovanni Giacometti gave to him, and Tours is the new inspiration that he could find in Paris, because he arrived in Paris in 22 to follow the sculpture course of Émile-Antoine Bourdelle à l'Académie de la Grande Chaumière. And Ottilia heads is more related to Charles Despier's work. And it was, at the time, was really famous, and we know that Giacometti saw these works, and also we have some copies. And Giacometti, when he arrived in Paris, he had what he knew came from his father, because his father was a famous artist, post-impressionist, and his knowledge was around Cézanne and Van Gogh. It was not more, he didn't know so much about the contemporary art of the time. And, this is like the beginning, because even if this is a work of an art student, is the first step of his camino, chemin.
Yeah, his way.
Of his way, that because for Giacometti every work helps for the next one.
Yeah.
So there are many links, and Giacometti he was very skillful. He has a natural gift for drawings, and he was the first son, and all family understood that he has something more than other guys, especially when he went to the college. And at the college he realized that he has a natural gift. He wanted to become an artist, and that's why he never finished the study at Shears, and he decided to become a painter or a sculptor.
Are these two works both from the same year, so 1925,
1925,
right?
Yes.
And one is a complete abstraction of the body, and the other one is almost a hyper-realist sculpture.
Because when he arrived in Paris, the first years, he was a student at l'Académie de la Grande Chaumière, and he knows everything about museum. He visited regularly Louvre, and but he started to also to see the private gallery and to become
to know these
works. And when he started to, for example, there is a preliminary version of Tours that was exhibited at Salon des Tuileries of 1925. This is his first exhibition. And to exhibit to the public gave him the opportunity to meet the artist. And for example, in 27, his sculpture, The Spoon Woman, was exhibited together with a work of Brancusi and Lipchitz. He was really proud to be, because the choice of the installation was made by the Salon, not by himself. He was really happy to see that he was at the same level of the previous generation. And because now he started to make his first exhibition, he was capable to talk with this artist. For example, Lipchitz, he met him at the bar, probably one of the bars in Montparnasse. He introduced himself as a student and asked him, that we know because he wrote this to his parents, and he asked to Lipchitz to invite him in his atelier. And Lipchitz was the most influential artist in this period. Then, also there are many Italian artists that, so we have to realize that at the time maybe the artist community in Montparnasse was 10,000 people. So Giacometti was a student, a known student. And all this, year after year, he became to have a reputation. Also, so that's why, for example, at Ottilia, we see that there is some, especially if we look at the profile, we see the Egyptian style, and also the Spiot, and this is the tradition that he started to refuse. Tours is completely a new way to create a sculpture related to the avant-garde. It's more to, there are some work of Lipchitz, even Brancusi, is like a synthesis of a human body divided in three parts, and the sex is the focus. All this work are interesting also because when he refused the academy, he was incapable to create his own sculpture, and he was obliged to look at the other artists. That's why in this moment, Lipchitz, Picasso, more paintings at the time, Zadkine also at the beginning, was really important for him. And in 29, he met André Masson, and Masson protect him and we see that in 29 it started to the influence also of surrealism, and even if the table they are all together, we also see that observed head is we have the bronze here, but is the sculpture that he was exhibited at the Jean Boucher Gallery in May 29, and he became really famous with his works. In 3 days, tout Paris spoke about Giacometti.
Tête qui regarde, that one, that is in the plaques on the right side, you see? That one. Tête qui regarde, that was bought by the Countess of Noailles.
But can I ask you, so there's, I guess the interesting thing about leaving, there's obviously a great will to step outside of the academy, but the immediate reaction seems to be to go towards very familiar styles that you find among the other avant-garde artists. But there's something that really always troubles me a bit with that moment, when that's the feeling that, I mean, we have 10 years of work here, and we have at least 3 huge movements of art that are sort of infiltrating into his practice. It's clearly, I mean, there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of trying here. There is cubism, and there's surrealism, and there's all these influences from other cultures and completely different locations.
From 22 till 25, we don't know anything. He destroyed all this sculpture. We know only the portrait of his relatives, because they were offered as a gift. So this is a selection that Giacometti made. Even if he refused all this period after the war, he kept in his atelier, and most of them are cast in the 50s, many years later. And in this period, Giacometti, for example, in the morning could study at the l'Accademia, and in his atelier he worked for himself. It's
that
in the same period.
Working,
yes.
But then I think, because Calvin, your exhibition right now, the one you're working on, that's really, really based on collecting a very huge variety of influences that from all kinds of geographical and historical and sort of, I guess there's something, I mean, it's a huge project to make, I mean, to find all and to work with all the influences, because he's clearly an artist that was working with a lot of influences. But it brings back the question of style, which I think is something that Giacometti was talking a lot about.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, I mean, that's another thing I was hoping maybe we can talk about, because I was thinking today, because he writes so much about style, and I was thinking today, so what does he mean by style? And what I could start thinking was about maybe style is difference. Maybe style is exactly that difference between very, very straightforward representation of something, what is left, what is maybe different from that sort of mirroring of the world is the style or the unique thing. But I was wondering, you're really working on that right now, so maybe...
Well, I'll start, 1922 is the year that Giacometti comes to Paris.
Yeah.
And as we begin to think about some of the influences we can see on his work out on the table there, I mean, that's a pretty formidable place to arrive in, Paris in 1922, if you're a young artist and you're trying to develop your own style. There's so much going on, there's so much that's important to art of any time, any place. And clearly there's, these influences are sort of permeating through his work, and he's trying to discover his own visual language, which I would argue he does in a number of elements. But in terms of our project, as often has happened, we've been completely blinded by the post-war period and that remarkable body of work that he produces in the 1940s, is shown in New York in '48 at the Pierre Matisse Gallery, and then the sort of repercussions of that are felt so strongly. And we will now see that body of work as one of the great bodies of work of the 20th century, arguably of any period actually. So when I stepped into the gallery here just a few weeks ago to see what was here on the table, it was a kind of stark reminder that with Giacometti, I mean, perhaps many of us are more familiar with the Surrealist pieces, which have been shown a lot. But the earlier pieces, the Cubist pieces, have not been shown so often, and not in such quantity, I would say. So that came as a little bit of a shock, and a sort of recalibrating of what you think about this artist, who clearly there are different stages where the work is of a very, very high standard from his early 20s. Now in the Sainsbury collection, we have drawings, early drawings that have, the precocious nature of his talent is clear. We have a wonderful study from 23 of a human skull, that sort of penetrating gaze that is as good as any piece of draftsman you're likely to see. But I was going to just quickly reference this piece, Femme. Plate 3, I could have chosen any of these sort of flattened forms. And I guess for me, there's several things that resonate. One is that just the way that he's simplified the form to these essential kind of marks, and there's very few marks here, but what is there, really gives you a sense or portrays the sensuous nature, the sexual nature of the way he handles the material. And again, for me, it was such a contrast to the later work. I've been spending weeks fussing about this sort of materiality of those sort of roughly hewn surfaces, and then suddenly to be confronted by this, such sort of soft tenderness. It kind of woke me up again. It got me quite excited. The other thing, I guess, one of the areas of research that I'm working on is the impact of Giacometti in Britain. Now, any country in Europe could play this game, anywhere in the world probably, could look at the impact of such a great artist. But again, focusing on some of the post-war artists like Francis Bacon, I assume Freud, Eduardo Palozzi. But actually, this again reminds me of the pre-war period when artists like Barbara Hepworth and Ben Nicholson, Henry Moore were going off to Paris and meeting these artists and actually responding to their work. So it appealed to me on that front as well. But yeah, I think it's the contrast in the approach to the use of the material. But Anthony, you're probably the one to talk about materials.
That was made in plaster originally, presumably, and then
been,
cast in bronze later.
Mm-hmm.
I think this really is an extraordinary show, because what we have here is an ambitious, hungry young man who is looking for a way to make relevant sculpture about real things, and there's no question that he's eating and then regurgitating things that he's seeing maybe for the very first time. I mean, to see Lipschitz's work, and he's seeing in the Cubist work this whole idea of a world that can be taken to pieces and put back together again. But the work that I want to choose is maybe the latest and the most awkward, in a sense, disagreeable object, because I think what he does with this, and this relates to a lot of the surrealist work, is dispense with the base, dispense with the whole idea of what way up, and allows this object to exist in the world as an awkward thing that doesn't actually know what it means. It is not a portrait, it is not a stelae, it is not something that stands up and wants to be noticed. It's something that sits, finds its own place of rest, and in a way demands to be picked up, which is the frustration for us when it's in a perspex box. But that liberation of sculpture from, in a way, presentation and standing up to be recognised and returning it to, I think, what he was actually also being stimulated by, all of that work that was in the Musée de l'Homme, the beginnings of African art that were being collected by all the artists and some collectors, and this idea that an object can have power because it is a fetish, that it tells you about danger, sexuality, death. The extraordinary way that this object, I mean, originally this was also made in plaster, and Giacometti kind of gave the plaster to a carpenter and said, make this again for me in wood. That's an interesting thing that we could talk about as well. But what is it that makes me choose this? I think it's liberating sculpture back into the world, taking it away from all of those frames of presentation, that whether it's the Academy or any kind of exhibition, the idea that somehow sculpture belongs on a plinth or has to make a base for itself. So many of these works, you can see the base in a way has to be integrated, or he uses the standard kind of tropes that come really from classical art of the portrait head that has its own. Anyway, I'm really excited to see this here, because I haven't seen it. I'd like to get it out of its case, and I'd like us all to pass it around and see what it feels like, because it's interesting. This gives rise, when you see Louise Bourgeois cradling her fillette, her stinky, latex penis, it's all in here.
But then what do we do with the fact that it can't be touched? There's a
why
real
can't we
frustration.
touch it? I think it would improve the patina if we did touch it.
Yeah. No, there's a real frustration with that, with minimalist art, with pieces that were meant to be stepped on and felt with, and that I think maybe that really relates to your practice in a way, and to the thought about public sculptures. because I think there's something about the relation, that maybe even a precursor of that thing where you don't just look at the object, you actually consider the relationship between you and it.
Yeah. And that bodily contact is the primary way, I think, in that you feel sculpture. And you could say it's very interesting. I mean, we should discuss this. In a way, at a certain point, Giacometti rejects style and says, no, my job is to bear witness to the world, and I have to bear witness to the function of seeing and leave an account of that activity, that research. And in a sense, I think he made extraordinary, and it's so exciting. I can't tell you how exciting it is to see this group of, like the potential of the man isn't necessarily in any one object. It's the bringing together of this. It's almost like a battery of possibility. But in the end, he rejects his surrealism. He rejects, in a way, this idea of style in order to pursue something that is universal and existential, which is the way in which we are immersed in a body, but also immersed in distance. That somehow the separation between us and the other is somehow has to be acknowledged, and I think that then becomes the obsession of his life. And many people would say, at a great loss, because there's no question that this is a man who's an obsessive compulsive. And what is marvellous in this show is to see the richness of an inquiring mind that is looking into the potential of sculpture as a physical, three-dimensional, tactile thing. I mean, what's lovely about all these objects, they're all things that you can pick up, that somehow exist within the realm of the body. Anyway.
Yeah. No, but I do have to mention this because this is a great quote that we've put in, and there was, because he wrote himself, the most loyal form of vision is given to us by the style. But of course, no one ever intended to create a style.
But you see, that's the difference. Style as here a hunger for a way of finding form is different from the style that comes from the form that you find by looking. That is, in a way, not about plucking the fruits of other people's, you could say, discoveries, but discovering for yourself. And he was, I think, very criticised for that. I mean, the break that he had with Breton and the surrealists who thought of him as a traitor. He's going back to the old style, work of working from, in a way, first-hand experience.
Yeah.
And there's part of me, it's interesting because I'm very, I think this Giacometti that we see in this room, is in a sense much more surprising, because there are no easy answers. It's all questionings about what art can be, what is an object, how do we relate to objects, how do objects relate to the world.
I think that's where the risk comes once you find an answer. I think there's something beautiful. I mean, looking at the plates that you sort of mentioned earlier, there's something obviously, and that's been written historically so much about this idea of making by subtracting, by taking away, by instead of sort of putting in amassing material, trying to think in a different form about making. And obviously, again, it goes into something very troubled, very difficult, and a very difficult relationship with the material. But there's something, I'm looking at these plates, I think these are the first works where something that idea of flattening seems to be like a very, very first moment. I think you mentioned it as sort of like the end of that period and a start of a very, very fresh Giacometti. And I think it's the first place where it's very hard to make that reductive assumption. Oh, that's a cubist sculpture. That's a surrealist gesture. And there's something about that moment that I think is really exciting. I think it's really the moment where things are sort of started to be found. And I wonder, were these ever made? They were made in plaster? These very, very flat ones? Really? And so the process was always from plaster, or because there's
At the
today,
time, most plaster, sometimes terracotta.
But was it additive? Was it? Did he start with an armature and then, in a way, spatula on the plaster, or did he make something in clay and then have it cast in plaster and then work on the plaster?
I don't know very well, but sometimes you have a armatura, a structure, iron structure, and with a pailla, like a straw.
Ah, yes.
And then he worked with plaster. Sometimes he has also a mold, so he could make a mold, and then he has the plaster cast with the mold.
So the originals could be this straw plaster mix or clay.
No, but also and this time he has his father support, and the family gave him money for a lot of time, so he was too poor to cast in bronze his works. That's one after he exhibit Tête qui regarde, observing Herd, Pierre Loeb, there was the dealer of the Surrealists, offered him a contract, and one of the appeal was that he was ready to cast his work. But he made 4 or 5 bronze sculpture in that period. But for example, the wood was a Giacometti idea. He charged a menuisier
Carpenter.
to create it, make a 5 sculpture in the 31, and then he made other one. Probably at that time he likes plaster and wood more than bronze.
But the wood is an interesting choice, I think, going back to what you say, for an object to handle with. Because there's something about the idea of handling with wood. I guess maybe that's it. Is it sort of, because it's a very strange choice of material, I suppose.
There were 5 that he made, wasn't there? There was the ball that made in wood, then the eye with the, what was point to eye.
Yes. And then there's the family, which is similar to what we have here as a disagreeable object, that is a plate standing on these things. So that one stands on 3, and it's called a family, and it's a beautiful. It's in Copenhagen. It's really, really
man, woman, and child.
Yeah.
So there are some. But when Pierre Loeb he was under this gallery. In the 30, there was an exhibition, Miro, Harp, and Giacometti. He exhibited suspended ball there.
In the plaster or in
the plaster.
Right.
And Dali and Breton fell in love with this work because before Giacometti, Surrealism has only objects. With Giacometti, they own a real sculpture together with art. That's after this sculpture, Dali wrote what's the name of the article?
I know what you speak.
Yeah, l'objet symbolique.
We'll get there.
Okay, no, for example, because in this period, Giacometti was very close to Salvador Dali. Also, objet désagréable is also a proof for this.
But they're both very, very sexual, aren't they? I mean, I think.
But Dali is sexual too.
Yeah.
No,
but I mean the I think, as if I remember it rightly, Dali's response to the ball suspended was this thing about desire.
Yeah, objet à fonctionnement symbolique.
Yeah.
But even suspended ball is sexual. The surrealism.
Yeah. But it's interesting, and he's another thing that I wonder about is this idea of, because I'm thinking about a person who wrote 1,400 letters to his family throughout his life. I understand that writing letters was a much more sort of an everyday practice, but then there's clearly, is that, you've read them all, and do you
not
think,
yet.
not yet, yeah. But there's something about the writing process that seems to be very, very critical. Constantly critical, and speaks about, the interesting thing I found is that he speaks of failure, but he constantly speaks of failure, but it doesn't seem like he speaks of failure always in a negative sense. It seems almost to be like a very motivating force. And I think there's something constantly about, I do things because I fail to do them. That's what makes me continue
But
making
with
these things.
Giacometti, he could talk about failure, but if someone else said that was a failure, he would become angry
He would
immediately.
become, yeah.
Yes, with Sartre, that was the problem. When
Because Sartre did what?
he wrote that in his book, he wrote about Giacometti. He said that Giacometti said, "I'm not capable to do anything," something like that. Giacometti was outraged. Even there was a joke with, for example, when he started to complain about the work, "I'm not capable, it's a failure," and his mother make a joke. I say, "Yes, you are right. This is really awful works," and he start immediately to defend. But even the letter are not really is also a literature in a certain way. He says something. He gives us some information about his life, but is written to his parents. So there's also a censura. But the best things are the carnet.
The notebooks.
He has some cahier in his pocket with drawings, idea. This is his personal.
Because that's what he's writing about work all the time.
Himself.
Yeah.
Only it's not. They are not. His thinking, his personal reflection is not like a text intended to be published in some review.
Yeah.
But I don't know any other artist that has used writing literally as a tool to interrogate his own assumptions, presumptions, and even his own history. So there are these key texts like Le Sphinx that in a way like help us see what he's seeing. I mean, they're pieces of extraordinary literature. You can feel the same compression. You know, when you talk about this early head. And the wonderful drawings, you all have to go to Norwich and see, you know, there's a self-portrait and this skull that are absolutely extraordinary because he's searching for the corners in a form that doesn't have corners and searching for a hidden structure. And anyway, it's exactly the same in his writing. So, you know, here we can see in this head, I think, the beginnings of, you know, tête de crâne, the kind of. He's not so interested in the way that light falls on an object. He's interested in, as it were, what it is that is underlying it. But it's that search for as it were the structure he applies to his own life. Like, what am I trying? What did I experience when I saw those 5 women at the end of a long tunnel, you know, that other famous thing where he comes out from the cinema and the whole. I don't really believe it's the truth, but I think it's a way in which he concentrates and crystallizes experience in writing that then. I mean, we find, I don't know whether you find it, but I just find that is an amazing tool to then look at the work again.
Yeah. He speaks a lot, I guess, about that exactly that place of how to make things the way they look true to him in sculpture, and write sort of how to reconcile ways. This is such a good, again, such a clear writing about one's work, but I really marked that bit because I thought that was extraordinary, the way I saw in you the bodies that attracted me in reality, and the abstract forms that seemed true to me in sculpture, but I wanted to make one without losing the other. And there's something so nice about that move, that simple gesture between like what you see and what is true in sculpture. And these like that reconciliation is such a complicated thing that is often sort of let into one and the other. I guess that's maybe why he continues to do realistic sculptures all his life. Is that, am I right saying that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's sort of continually.
Yeah, because he can arrive to a conclusion. Yeah. Because reality changes every time. So he tried to kept
Yeah.
the ressemblance,
Yeah.
but there is no way. But
But that's also the transition constantly that he writes about, moving to working from memory and then working with a model and then working from memory, and for periods, for years, completely neglecting models and then going back to memory. I guess that tension exactly between memory and practices, and memory and reality, that thing of do these two things, how do they reconcile? Maybe they reconcile in sculpture. But if I take it for a second it's a very cliche question that is being asked very often, but sort of the relevance of Giacometti today. I think it still remains like a very, I don't know, I've noticed that recently there's a lot of exhibitions about it and a lot of use of the term presence, which I find to be interesting maybe for the question of why are we showing Giacometti today and what is our interest with that sense. You want to say something?
Yeah,
Thank you.
about the relevance of Giacometti today. So the piece that you have chosen, Kevin, as your choice, the plaster for which I believe comes from one of the art critics in London and was preempted recently by the British government, which I think is a major thing about the importance of Giacometti today. Why should a piece, a plaster that was cast in 1927, that one, the one that you like, the British government decided to preempt its exploitation because suddenly it becomes relevant. We never know before really why things become relevant. They always ask me, how did you know, or how would you know? One doesn't know. But they become relevant when they become relevant. And it's probably the first Giacometti plaster that is preempted. It has a big prize for an early piece that were always terribly neglected by the market and by governments. They gave a prize to it, and they say that they want it in Britain. So how is Giacometti relevant today? I think that's the beginning of it. In a way that maybe the head of the Henry Moore Foundation or somebody else who is interested in sculpture thought that plaster is something we need to keep. So that was just a small note about relevance.
Yes. I mean, I don't know the specific detail on this particular work, but I guess, something I mentioned earlier about the significance to British art of the 30s, I suspect there is an element of that in the decision. Possibly also the fact that there aren't many early pieces in collections in this country. So in Scotland they have some early pieces, but actually his early work is not
What
very
have
represented.
What have they got in Scotland?
They have the woman with a cut throat,
Yes.
and they have the National Galleries.
in Edinburgh?
Yes,
in Edinburgh, yes, and they have a disagreeable object as well.
and disagreeable objects.
Yeah.
In bronze.
I think it's in wood.
In wood,
yeah.
wood too.
Yeah.
How many wood ones are there?
only one.
Oh, so that's it.
No, this is a bronze. Oh, yes, the objet désagréable is only one
Edinburgh
wood.
is the only one.
And the plaster is Beaubourg.
But can I go back to that? Because that reminds me, I wanted to ask this before. Disagreeable object, not only, but disagreeable object to be rid of. Some of them are called, this one is called, right? The one that Antony was showing earlier. Where does that name come from? I mean, there's something so aggressive, so violently aggressive
I
to
think
words.
it's the Permatis letter.
I mean, historically.
No, the
yeah.
title came
title
from
comes from there.
Giacometti gave, yes.
Yeah.
In 1947, much after he did it.
And before the title are Composition.
Really?
But no, Objet désagréable also, it's already was exhibited in 36.
With the title.
With that title.
Yes,
Yeah.
with this title, yes.
Oh, it's a surrealist illustration.
Yes, completely surreal.
Incredible.
But for example, why Giacometti is so important, I think
Yeah,
that
sorry.
the Walking Man is the best representation of the 20th century. No, and also I think is the last sculpture who talk about death, who we are, what. There are so many in philosophical insights. His work, even if he worked with reduction, they are full of faults. You never stop to interrogate in front of a Giacometti sculpture. That's why he was so close to many writers.
Did it get close to exactly this kind of thought? Because Yves Bonnefoy, who's one of the big
last,
writers of Giacometti monographies, wrote about that gesture of working by reducing, writing that, comparing it to what we call apophatic theology or negative theology, which is a kind of a way to understand religion or theology in negative terms. So instead of having representations of the God, there is exactly the opposite. The fact that we cannot see something, that we don't have an image of something, but we only have negative forms, that's what actually gives power to a certain idea, a metaphysical idea. And I think there's something about this that I always wonder whether, is there something there that is it purely a material investigation? Is there something metaphysic? And I don't know historically and also biographically if there is some kind of a sense of that thing, or is it something that remains within?
But isn't that what he rejects? I mean, isn't the reason that Giacometti is beloved of Beckett and in a way the existentialists, the fact that he rejects the transcendent and the ineffable and says we are what we are, we have what we've got. What we've got to do is try and see it. And when he's constantly saying what is reality, and I'm not achieving it, I'm not giving a true account of existence. I mean, you could say that's metaphysical, but it's also it's a cruel command that he's giving himself. And why is Giacometti important? Well, I think he because of that command that he gives himself, he makes sculpture important, and it takes it completely away from this. I'm a bit surprised about this obsession with style because, the idea that the artist is the human being who, by his example, makes life itself an adventure, an investigation into the, in a way, the roots of what existence is. I mean, that, Giacometti and maybe Brancusi in a different way, those two artists both embody that idea of the artist as in a way, the example of human freedom. The example of somebody who defines their own work in their own space, in their own time, and then does it for everybody. And I think that, for me, the example of Brancusi and the example of Giacometti are absolutely, essential. They are a measure of an artist's commitment, and he, I think he's and it's interesting because it is both in the writing, the way that he articulates for himself and to those closest to him what his mission is, what his experience is. It's very, very similar to Van Gogh's letters. This intense interrogation. And there are no prisoners, and that studio of his, that is also a kind of TARDIS, a kind of example of, I guess, the 20th century artist, par exemple, with in a way no possessions other than the work itself and tiny space. You can't think of Bacon's studio without thinking of Giacometti's studio. That attachment to, in a way, the leavings. If it wasn't for, as I understand, if it wasn't for Diego, he probably wouldn't have shown anything. He wouldn't have ever cast anything, and he would have kind of carried on, just making and destroying.
Yet he showed these earlier pieces in 48, and there was a sense that not everything was destroyed, and he was certainly content to show earlier pieces. Is there anything in the letters, I've not seen the translations yet, to suggest of what he was allowing to be seen, to be circulated?
But for Giacometti, do an exhibition was like to have a balance, like was a way to look at what he has done and what he would like to do. That's why when Pierre Matisse offered to do an exhibition after the war, that takes it took more than 1 year. Giacometti always changed the date. Finally, he decided. And at the beginning, it was only to show the recent works, but then he thought it was important to show all everything from the beginning till 47. And
but he couldn't do it without sending a very detailed letter to
Yeah.
Pierre Matisse. I'm sending you these sculptures, but I cannot do so without first explaining you. And there was something so interesting about it. I mean, he's sending his work, and he's sending a letter to chase it, because there is some this
for him,
worry,
yes, it was important to explain everything.
Yeah.
Especially because after when he left Surrealism, some work were exhibited with the Surrealism movement, like Burlington Galleries in '36, but in '39 Verve published 2 recent works, and in '37 Pierre Matisse lent Femme qui marche at MoMA, and '45 Peggy Guggenheim made an exhibition on Giacometti early works. So during the war, only 3 small exhibitions in his career. That's why Pierre Matisse's offer was really important, and the proof is the letter that he wrote.
I see.
But Giacometti, even if he said that there was a masturbation, that he kept all these works, and the proof that for him were really important, that he were cast in bronze, especially after '54, when he became famous in '48, but in the '50s he became really famous, and in the '60s, but his career is not so long, because he died in 66.
Yeah, but it's funny when you speak exactly about this relationship between the bronze and the plasters, which is something that also I think that the plasters have recently gained a lot more attention than they used to have in the past. And there's Jean Genet, when he had a conversation with him, he asked him once. So he said, Giacometti asked him, "Do you think that the sculptures gain from being cast in bronze?" And he told him, "You're going to dismiss me again, but I have a funny feeling about it. I'm not going to say that they gain, but rather that it's the bronze that has gained. For the first time in its life, bronze has come to be the winner. Your women, they're a victory for bronze, over itself perhaps." And then Giacometti answered, "It should be that." So maybe we end on this nice note of a conversation. But really, thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and thank you for Daniela and Alma for this incredible opportunity for all of us.
Yeah, here.
And thank you for the time.